Hi, welcome everybody to this session on smarter integration with IBM Cloud Pak for integration. And what we're going to cover in this session is we're going to talk a little bit about the market dynamics that we see around integration, to explain some of the investments we've made and cover some of the exciting new features we have in our latest release of the Cloud Pak for integration, 2022.2.1, which is actually released today to market. So this is a very timely presentation for that. Well, let me just move to the first slide here. So this slide is really trying to summarize the way that we see the integration market and the way that we see integration requirements being manifested and the sort of things that are coming to us from customers. And really we're seeing it as a combination of all of these different types and styles of integration are really what is driving the demand, what we typically see integration being about and the things that are being asked for. And if I start kind of at the bottom here with like messaging and connectivity, what we're really talking about here is that what business success is really about like handling those core, handling and processing those core business transactions. So the data in those transactions need to be moved around and transformed and delivered securely and reliably. So things like a customer or order, that might involve updating an invoicing system, updating shipping systems, updating customer records securely and reliably and transactionally in response to that single order. Updates to stock control, for example, might require those things to be transactional and so on. And this is really like the core integration requirements that we see for integration that have existed for many years. And it's a market which IBM has been very successfully in. And we've had with our products around like MQ and App Connect and Aspera and Data Power. But what we've seen like kind of growing is a new styles of integration, new requirements around integration, which have been typically driven around APIs and events. And if we think about what we're talking about with APIs, what this is really about is the ability to do what we call API-led integration. This would be as an integration approach, or maybe to take advantage of things like exposing APIs externally and so forth. But in terms of integration software, what this is really about is like, how can we easily create APIs? How can we expose data to microservices, enterprise applications, SaaS applications, and so forth, by creating reusable interfaces that we can get to and understand and call as APIs. There's a little bit about like, well, how do we secure that? How do we secure access to those things? Particularly important if we're going out across the internet for external APIs and so forth. And then really, how do we manage and socialize? How do we enable people to find APIs? How do we manage the life cycle of it? How do we manage like when they retire and so forth? And how do we also like socialize what APIs we have and so forth? And these things are other areas where IBM has a whole range of products that exist in this space that deliver on these use cases. Things like API Connect, App Connect, and Data Power acting as an API gateway are very successful in providing these capabilities to the customer. When we think about like another growing area of integration requirements, it's really from event integration. And what this is really about is like anything that can happen in the business. It can be triggered internally, externally. It could be something happening in the system, something happening externally, is an event. And each event is going to generate new data. And the business wants to be able to respond to those events. It wants to respond to the data. It wants to be able to understand and analyze those events as they happen and in the past in order to make business decisions and so forth. An event might need to move through the business. So an event might be like, say, a new customer order, and we want that to update all the right systems and applications and give that make that update flow across the integration layer into those backend systems. And the ability to provide those updates and data-driven insights comes from other products that IBM has, like event streams, event endpoint manager, and again, Data Power, providing an enterprise gateway. So what we can see from this picture is just by using the traditional IBM products, we have a complete set of capabilities which can address these common use cases. But then if we look at kind of other requirements, other impacts that are driving and happening across integration, we can see that the traditional approaches of deploying these applications, the traditional approaches of how we focus on delivering integration can sometimes fall short. And what we can see in these things is that in order to build integrations, traditionally, it's a very highly manual and highly skilled task. You need real experts in integration in order to be able to build integrations. And what we've described and what we've seen is that there's been a huge growth in the amount of integrations that are required today. And that's becoming an issue around how do we get people with the right skills in order to meet the demand we have for that. And one way that software vendors can approach that problem is by looking at reducing the barrier, reducing the skills barrier needed to build and implement those tasks. What we also see as a problem with like solving these integration challenges using traditional integration software is a lack of operational visibility. You can't really understand exactly where the problem happens or do problem determination rapidly because each of the individual products is approaching the way that it provides visibility into what's happening on their own. There's an integrated view that gives you a view across all of those integration components and solutions and so forth. And what we also feel is like traditional integration approaches fall short is that any integration challenge typically isn't going to involve using multiple products. It's going to involve that I need to be able to say something like as simple as expose an API. It's going to require me to use things like API Connect for the API management layer, but it's probably going to also involve using things like App Connect, provide an application integration layer, possibly MQ under the covers to provide back-end connectivity to different systems and so forth. And a single approach is just using point products typically fail or are suboptimal in how they approach the integration solution. And that was what led us to creating the IBM Cloud Pak for integration. Now, if you think about what the IBM Cloud Pak for integration is a combination of all of IBM's portfolio of integration products into a single offering. And it supports within it a mix of traditional modern integration styles. So all of the things that you can see, all of the approaches you can see in the diagram here are supported within the Cloud Pak for integration. So that with a single product, you can address all of the enterprise integration requirements you have in a complete hybrid integration platform. And it's about providing development and operational agility. And we do that through consistent deployment onto Red Hat OpenShift Kubernetes, which enables us to have a much more agile integration architecture based on DevOps best practices and address some of those concerns I talked about on the previous slide. And we also provide platform-level features, so things like operational dashboard and platform navigator, give us a single view of our integration state, and therefore enable us to reduce costs and achieve simplified operations and management of the platform as a whole. What we also do when we talk about Cloud Pak for integration, we're also providing additional value by addressing those cross-cutting use cases that I described, where we need to use multiple integration products. So an example of that we will talk through and get into more detail through the session is around the API integration piece here, where we have features which combine App Connect and API Connect into a single user experience in order to address any use cases you have around APIs. And event integration, where we have all of the different capabilities to drive all of those capabilities provided here in the box. For example, CP4I is unique in it provides API and event endpoint management in a single tool, and also has a single user experience to offer and manages APIs that's not available in the standard products. And we do a lot of these things by leveraging AI and a lot of the innovation that you will see coming from IBM in order to address that skills gap and make people more productive and faster to build integration is coming from what we describe as automation and AI. And Cloud Pak for integration has a whole bunch of AI features which enable you to do low, no-code, AI-powered integration, focusing on making those menial tasks much quicker and reducing the skills need to do that. And what I'm going to talk about in this session is going through some of those new features that we have in our latest release, which are really focused on accelerating your ability to build new integrations using those low-code tools. So let me just, before we get into that, talk a little bit about some of the changes we're making kind of to release cadence and how we will support our releases. And what we have with the Cloud Pak for integration on latest release is it is going to be a long-term support release. You may be aware that the previous versions of the Cloud Pak for integration were delivered on IBM's continuous delivery model. And what that meant was that you only get fixes available on the head of the stream, the latest CD release. And we have a lot of feedback from customers that we need to be able to support an individual release for much longer. A customer wants like a stable environment with which to run. We have done that previously. We did have a previous version of the Cloud Pak for integration, 2024.1, which provided that longer support. But one issue we had with that is that it was linked to a specific OpenShift level. It was linked to OpenShift 4.6. So what we're doing with this new release is we're making a very clear statement that we will support this release for 2 years. We will not deliver additional features into this release. We will just deliver patches on top of it. And we'll also roll forward support of OpenShift. So any EUS support of OpenShift that is in support during the lifetime of this long-term release support will be supported by it. So we will support OpenShift 4.10 as we've released today, and then we will support 4.12, 4.14 going forward. And this release will be supported for 2 years. And we will also have another LTS release in about 18 months to provide you about 6 months to move between different releases. And then when we don't have 2 LTS releases in support, we will also introduce new CD releases, which will deliver like new function and new innovation that you can take advantage of if you wish to, or you can remain on this stable long-term release, knowing that it's going to provide you with a stable platform that you can use and address and work through for all of your requirements and so forth. So let's move to talk a little bit about the content that is coming in this release. And we'll start by looking at the individual product deliveries that are delivered as specific to that. So not looking at the sort of Cloud Pak level, we're looking at the individual components and what new capabilities are delivered within CP4I. And we start by looking at API Connect. And what we're delivering in this release of API Connect is adding support for zLinux. So zLinux is already supported by the rest of the Cloud Pak. We've extended that support to also enable you to use API Connect. And what we've also delivered in this release is some additional tools and accelerators to help you with migration from V5 to V10. There are also enhancements to the analytics to reduce both the size of it and improve the quality of the analytics that you can do. And we're introducing support for API Connect to have 2-site DR failover for CP4I, which has been a very common requirement that we've had from customers. We're also looking a little bit about enhancements to @Connect. And what we're introducing for @Connect is we've got some additional Spark connectors that we've delivered. And we're also extending where you can use those Spark connectors such that you can use them for the toolkit. If you're familiar with the @Connect environment, you'll know that there were 2 development environments. There is the designer piece, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a moment. But there's also the Eclipse-based former older toolkit, which customers are very familiar with. And that hasn't previously provided access to smart connectors. And as of this release, we provide like multiple smart connectors that you can use. And actually, there's an update on this chart that 8 of those connectors are actually fully production supported. They're not just tech preview. There's also been updates in @Connect to the transformation divisor. And we've added a new node, a file trigger node, to improve our file handling capabilities within @Connect. Data Power. Data Power, as you may be aware, has also this quarter had a new physical appliance refresh. So Cloud Pak for integration does not include the physical appliance, but it does include all of the enhancements that Data Power has made around the user experience, the user web management interface, which gives a much more common user experience with the other IBM solutions and tech components. Aspera is a component of the Cloud Pak for integration designed to help support high-speed file transfer, so like streaming of media files across the internet. So think of like a Netflix type scenario as that. We have focused in this release in the Aspera team on improving our integration with what we call the Cloud Pak platform. So the infrastructure that the Cloud Pak runs on, we've improved to improve our integration with the Grafana, integration with the platform Navigator for reporting and statistics. Looking at MQ, we have extended our support for MQ on p-Linux, to remove the manual steps required to configure and deploy AMQ. So that means it now has a fully supported operator that comes with the product. We're extending our support of native HA, the native HA component of MQ to Power, and also enabling streaming queues, enabling record and replay. In event streams, we've introduced OAuth support. We've also updated all of the stat to the latest Kafka and API Curio and Strimzi open source levels and so on. And we've introduced new documentation that describes the HA topologies and so forth. So that was a run-through of the product-level enhancements that you will see in the Cloud Pak for integration in this release. But that's not the only enhancement we've made. We've also been focused on, like I described, how we can introduce AI and automation into the Cloud Pak and focus on those cross-cutting scenarios where I need to use multiple products together, such that when you use the Cloud Pak to address integration challenges, you're getting a different additional value over if you were to try and just use the individual products alone. And I'm going to talk about some of that continued innovation that we have within the Cloud Pak in terms of no code and ability to build integrations and automation over the next few slides. And I'm going to start with this discussion around the designer interface that we have. This sits on part of App Connect, and it gives us a no-code interface to be able to build integrations very quickly and easily. So it's like a no-code tool, easy guided, intuitive tooling that guides you through the process of building integrations. So it's aimed at lowering the skills gap. And you can look at that in two ways. It's like lowering the skills gap such that more people within your organization are able to easily build integrations. But also, the other way of looking at it is it's focused on making the task for skilled people to build integrations much quicker and easier before. And therefore, you get increased productivity, you get reduced time to market, and so on. And the real question really, I think, is well, how does it achieve that? And the first thing to note is, well, it looks very easy. If you look at the screen captures I have here, you can see that it's a very easy platform to use, very easy and clear about what you're doing in an integration flow. Like you have labels on the path which tell you what's happening and so forth, in basically, easy to read language. But that isn't really the secret sauce. That's not really what IBM is providing, which really makes this a genuine, easier tool to use and build integrations. And what that secret sauce really is we've been very focused in the engineering team on, well, how do we actually go about building an integration? And how can we as a vendor, a software vendor, make that process much easier than it's ever been before? And the first way that we provide that is through those smart connectors that I mentioned earlier that are now available also within the toolkit. And what this is about is if you actually think about the process that you go through in order to connect systems together, the majority of the time is actually spent on you trying to understand how you actually physically connect to that system. So it's like, well, what technology protocol do I actually have to use to connect to that system? Does it expose an API? Is it a queue-based interface? Is it a file? And once I understand like even that kind of technology and what security implications there are for how I connect to that system, I then need to understand, well, what actually are those interfaces? What kind of capabilities do they provide? What operations do they provide that enable me to manipulate the data? And what is the format of that data? What is the structure of that data? So just that kind of effort to understand like the systems you want to integrate with is huge. And in my experience, it's like the majority of everything we do in building the integration is focused on how we achieve that. And therefore, like we've looked at that problem from a vendor point of view and thought, well, how can we accelerate that? And the way that we're looking to accelerate that is for us to do the work of understanding how to connect to a system for you. And that's really what the smart connectors do. They are built within the lab to understand how to connect to any of like hundreds of different SaaS and on-premise systems. So we understand the protocol that's used, we understand the kind of security requirements, we understand the kind of logging requirements and so forth. And all of that is basically abstracted away, so you don't have to worry about it. You, within the designer interface, any system you connect to looks exactly the same. You just connect to them using the connector. And what's even smarter is the connectors actually then go and interrogate the system. So they will then pull back from that, what are all the operations that are available to me on this system? And additionally, what is all the data structures that are available? They just pull that like live from the system into you. And I want to stress that this is like a dynamic thing. It's not just looking at kind of the vanilla install of what that system would be. So for example, if you've gone and customized Salesforce to add your own operations, add your own fields, extend fields, and so on, the tool will discover that and it will pull that information to you. And we find that massively just accelerates the process of building any integration. Because now I don't need to spend time on understanding the low-level detail of how I integrate. I can just pull that connector onto the palette and focus on the integration logic that I'm trying to build. But that's not where we didn't just stop with that level of thought process. And now we're going to get into some of the key automation and AI features that are available only within the Cloud Pak for integration. We also started thinking about, well, what are the other things that I need to do and take a lot of time when I'm building any kind of integration? And the next most expensive thing after how do I connect to that system, how do I understand what the data formats are, is to actually map between those different systems. So it's like I want to connect, say, Salesforce to SAP. I have to manually go through and map from one system to another. That can be very time-consuming to do. But if you think about the process of actually what you're actually doing when mapping, it's actually very repetitive. It's likely that you're building multiple integrations that will need to map between those same systems in slightly different ways, but probably 95% of the time. And that makes it a very rich area for machine learning and for AI to analyze what you're doing within the mapping. So if you think about like kind of the concept of predictive text on your mobile phone or your cell phone, where it's trying to guess what you're trying to say and making suggestions to you, it's similar kind of approach for how we're approaching this with what we call mapping assist. And what this will do is it will look at how you have mapped systems in the past. And it will make suggestions to you on, therefore, how it thinks you might want to map between these systems today. And it will learn from your responses. So if you say, no, I don't want to do it that way, I want to do it a different way, it will learn from that. And it will change its like priority suggested mapping, resulting as a result of that. And that we have found, just this kind of like applying AI to the concept of how you do mapping is really saving a huge amount of time. We've got like, it makes it about twice as fast to build a mapping than it's ever been before. So it's a real time saver for how you can map between different systems. And that's not the only thing that we're providing. We also have this concept of data assist, which is really around like extending that concept of mapping. Because when you're doing mapping between different systems, you quite often have to do like transformations, and those transformations can be things like data. So it can be, I want to take a telephone number in one format, like the example I've got on the screen here, and map it slightly differently. Or I want to map, say, the state in the US from, say, Texas to TX, or country from United Kingdom to UK, and so on. And all those things can happen repeatedly. So again, what we've done is we've introduced AI into our data assist component that actually stores and helps you to do those mappings. So it can dynamically figure out what you're trying to do and suggest using those transformations as and when you want to. So again, this is another example of how we're trying to address like the bits of integration that are very time consuming and take the pain away from you and accelerate the process from which to do it. So that was looking very much at like how we do it in the tooling, like how do we make the process easier. But let's step back a little and think about a use case where actually I want to focus on a single task. And the example of this single task is I actually want to be able to create an API. I want to expose an existing system as an API. And if you think about like kind of what that process typically involves in most integration solutions, it actually involves using at least 2 integration products. It involves using the integration technology you will use to connect to the backend system and expose something as an API. So typically something like app integration like we provide in App Connect is involved in that piece. It's like I would connect to a system that might be offering some kind of legacy type interface, and I would modernize it as an API, ensuring it met the requirements I had for that API. And then traditionally what I would need to do is I would then need to export that definition of that API into my API management world. If I then wanted to apply things like policies to that API, policies being things like rate limiting or access control policies and so forth. And then I would then need to then take that API and test it. And that's, again, a very time-consuming process I'm going to get to in a moment. But just that process of actually, I as a user want to build an API doesn't stop the way with the quite the boundaries that we have in traditional products. It's actually that I would actually want to be able to create that API and then apply those policies as one thing. And that's what we've introduced as what we call unified API authoring. So this is a unique to Cloud Pak for integration user experience that enables me to both create the definition of the API, create the implementation of the API, and then apply policies and have that policy managed. So basically, it's combining the user experiences of App Connect and API Connect into a single authoring experience. And then when we've got that thing built, we can then deploy it as a single API artifact. I'm going to talk a little bit about more what we're doing about that in the future. But if you also think about like stepping back of the process where I've got to build that API, that, to be honest, isn't where most of the work is. It's like it's quite labor intensive to build and expose an API and understand what you want to do. But actually, the majority of the work you have to do is about testing that API. So in order to deliver like kind of a high quality API, I really need to build alongside my API implementation a high quality API test suite that will enable me to test that API when I make changes to that API or deploy that API, ensure that it isn't regressed in its performance and so forth. And what we have within the Cloud Pak for integration is a feature called Auto Test Assist, which provides an intelligent testing for APIs. So this enables us to take most of the manual steps out of what you need to do and the skills needed to build that API test suite. And therefore, that gives your developer a lot more time. They don't have to manually generate comprehensive test cases. It's all done for you in the tooling. So if we think about like what we're actually describing here, how does this actually work? Well, it has a number of features within Auto Test Assist that enable you to accelerate your testing. So the first thing that it does is it looks at your API schema, your open API spec that you've created for that API, and will generate tests and data based on all the different paths it can see from that open API definition. That gives you like a good kind of unit test, if you like, capability of what that API is and all the different paths that we can see for it. But then when like we go beyond like kind of traditional test generation tools, is we also can get AI insights by then looking at that API and getting insights from production running or QA running of that API. So what we do within CP4I is we use AI engines to analyze what's actually happening when you're actually running that API and discover if you have gaps in your test suite and new use cases we weren't really able to identify, and understand like the balance. So it's like, well, how many go down this path? How many go down? How many of our APIs are actually kind of exercising this part of the API over that part, and so forth. And that enables us to automatically generate tests to fill those gaps and understand the correct balancing between the different tests that we are, so that we make a much more comprehensive test suite than we ever had before. And what we've specifically done, some of these features already existed in Cloud Pak for integration, but what we're actually introducing in our new release today is the ability to schedule auto-generated tests. So we already have the capability to generate those tests based on the static definition of the API and what we see in production. And what we can now do is we can generate tests to run for multiple hours to really stretch and test what's happening with your API and generate all of the test data. So not just run the same test repeatedly for 12 hours, actually generate millions of different tests based with random test data in it, but biased towards what we know are the tests that are most likely to run. So it's like got some intelligence behind it, how we're doing it. And then we can do things like report how many tests have run, the failure rates, and so forth. And this like kind of basically means that with the Cloud Pak for integration, we have the process by which we can build and define the API, the process by which we add that API into the API management tool and therefore expose it to the catalog so consumers can come in and we do enforcements at that API, all automated as a single user experience. And also, as part of that whole experience, do all of the testing for you, generate all of the testing that you need to do for you, such that the process to both build, manage, and test an API is fully automated for you. You just really need to focus on what's the business logic I want to put in that API, and all of the things which have traditionally been really expensive and really time-consuming are done for you by the tool. So I want to switch gears a little bit, and we've talked a little bit about how we work with REST APIs, how we work with asynchronous APIs, how we have tooling that enables you to create those APIs, manage those APIs, and test them. But if we think back to what we described earlier about like kind of API integration and what we're trying to achieve with that, well, a lot of the use cases around APIs are very much about focusing on a good customer experience. And if we think about like what that actually means, let's look at an example of like a new app that I want to build. And I'll be using like kind of APIs in order to provide access from that app to any back-end systems that I need. I think what's clear, let's just think about like an app, like a cell phone app for an airline. And you can see how the REST API pattern fits very well for some of the interactions I would like to have with that app. So, for example, anything which the customer is initiating, so the user of the app is initiating, REST is a great pattern for how we can get access to back-end systems from the app. So it's things along the lines of, oh, I want to reserve a seat, or I want to book a ticket on a new flight, and so on. Is the customer basically calling to the systems running in the airline in order to make those updates? So like to book the seats, to book the flight, and so on. But some of the other interactions, some that would give us a much more complete user experience within that mobile phone app, actually the other way around. It's like where the airline wishes to push information to the users of the app. So it could be things like, I want to notify every passenger on this flight about a delay or that the gate has changed. So I want to be able to publish information to all of those people. Now that is a pattern which is increasingly important for good customer experience. There's also something which is addressed very much through a new standard around APIs called async APIs. And this is very much based on Kafka type technology. So it's publish subscribe technology where I can push that data to anybody who's registered as a consumer of information. And what is unique about the Cloud Pak for integration is it has actually the capabilities to provide all of these types of APIs and manage all of those APIs in a single toolset. Now that is actually, as far as I'm aware, unique in the integration market. You typically see companies who specialize just on REST APIs, or they specialize just on Kafka. You don't see people who provide a management experience that covers both of those types of API in a single place and in a single user experience. And the reason we're able to achieve that within the Cloud Pak integration is we include a fully supported Apache Kafka environment called IBM Event Streams, where we provide additional capabilities on top of that. Some of those additional capabilities are what's listed on the screen here now. And we combine that with a feature which we call IBM Event Endpoint Management. And what this is an extension of the capabilities you get in API Connect standalone to enable you, if you have Cloud Pak for integration, to within that same environment manage Kafka endpoints. So the Kafka endpoints are managed completely in the same tool. The developer who is building, like, say, our airline mobile app will see exactly the synchronous and asynchronous APIs presented in exactly the same way in the catalog, and be able to consume them in exactly the same way, whether they are REST or asynchronous API. Including, as part of this, what you would expect from a management platform, the event gateway service to secure and protect those transactions and so forth. So one of the key value propositions of API that I'm trying to stress here is like the whole approach of digital transformation. Cloud Pak for integration provides all of the tools you need to build and maintain successful digital applications. So it's like we have first-class support for able to build and create APIs, we have first-class support for Kafka, and we have first-class ability to manage both of those things in a single user experience. Stepping back slightly and going back to that point of view around like how can we address the skills barrier? We talked a lot about how Designer does that, and we talked about like kind of how we reduce the experience, the skills required to build and manage and expose APIs. But we want to go beyond that. So one of the things that we're working on quite a lot within the lab these days is what we call goal-oriented flow assist. And this is the basic concept of this is I don't actually need to code or touch the keyboard to an extent to actually build an integration flow. What if I could just describe it? What if I could just ask Alexa type of thing, ask Cloud Pak for integration, build me an integration that connects A to B, and then the tooling itself would generate all that for me. And that's something that we're providing now in Cloud Pak for integration, is the ability to be able to describe an integration and have Cloud Pak for integration generate that flow for you. So just to give an example of the sort of thing that what we're describing here, is what it actually does at the moment is it matches against templates. It matches against examples of integrations that you might want to build. So I can just describe an integration as just using natural language. I'll do it by typing it into the text box here, describing the scenario. So I might want to tap something like, oh, I want to capture festival attendees. That's what I'm describing. The system will know that when you say you want to capture festival attendees, you actually have a system that you use to track attendees at events, like Eventbrite in this example. And I will say, oh, okay, you are basically telling me that anytime a new attendee is entered into Eventbrite, I want something to happen. I want to trigger my integration based on that event happening. And then it might be, well, what I want to actually do is I want to capture festival of attendees as new leads in my marketing database. And it's the system of, okay, therefore I'm aware that you use Marketo for this, and I'm aware that there is an operation on the Marketo system that enables me to create a new lead. So what I will do is I will generate such that when a new attendee is registered in Eventbrite, it will create a lead in Marketo. But then you might say, well, actually, no, I don't want to do that. I want to capture the registered attendees in new leads in Salesforce, not in Marketo. Just by entering that as the text, the system will know that you actually need to use Salesforce here. And it can also go beyond that, because you then might want to say, well, I only want to connect them in Salesforce if they're in the US, else if they're in the rest of the world, maybe I want to connect them in Marketo. And what we're seeing here is that by just using text, we can build up an integration flow in order to enable you to deliver on any integration requirement that you have without you actually doing any coding at all. Now, this is currently in the product as experimental, and we continue to enhance and extend how smart it is and how easy it is to do. And what we're also announced and what we've also introduced is if you choose to, you don't have to, you can use just what's delivered to you in the software product itself. You can from here link to a SaaS version of Gopher. You don't have to pay for that experience. But what that gives you is it will give you all of the latest kind of investment that we're making across research in understanding kind of the different phrases that you use and so forth. So you get a better and more complete experience and set of deliverables. Again, entirely optional. You'll just see a button in the user interface saying, do you want to use the SaaS version or do you want to work within the product? But by going to the SaaS version, we're able to learn and deliver much more quickly on understanding the sort of integration that we're trying to do. So those are like some of the key highlights, key innovation that we've delivered within Cloud Pak for integration. But that's not the only things that we've done. I just want to highlight a couple of other things that we've introduced in this new release. And then I'm going to go a little bit about what we're looking at for the rest of the year, what the sort of features we're working towards beyond this release. So the first thing to note is that we completely removed the requirement for RWX storage. Now, the reason why this is significant is if you're trying to deploy the Cloud Pak for integration on, say, a public cloud, say on Google Cloud or AWS or Azure, quite often those cloud providers do not have a native RWX storage provider. So this really simplifies our ability to be able to deploy on public cloud. I can now deploy without having to requirement around RWX storage. I don't have to work around that requirement. The default is that it's not required. Some other things we've focused on is, well, how can we make the experience of working with the Cloud Pak for integration easier? And some of the feedback we've had is because the Cloud Pak has so many different components I could choose to use, but I don't necessarily want to actually install everything, because keep in mind I only need to install what I actually use with the Cloud Pak. The way that we talk about installation is confusing. It's not customized enough for my specific environment. I want to be able to say, oh, I just want to use these specific components in these ways on these particular technologies and so forth. So what we've introduced is an interactive install guide. And what this does is you answer some questions about the environment that you are trying to build. What do I actually want to install as part of Cloud Pak for integration? And then from that information, we generate a custom guide for you on how you would install the Cloud Pak for integration. How do you install just those components, walk you through the exact steps to install those specific things, rather than you having to wade through all of the documentation where, say, 50% of it isn't relevant to what you're trying to achieve. Another usability feature we've introduced is this view where we can combine integration instances into a single view. So you can see all of your different instances, all of your different components that are running in a single view, and therefore do things like understand what versions they're running, see if there's an upgrade available, like to the operator, in order to apply fixes and so forth. And that really makes upgrading quicker and easier. And that actually leads me nicely to starting to talk about, well, what is it that we're looking to achieve with the Cloud Pak for integration going forward? And what we're very focused on in our next iteration is we've had a big focus on the experience of how I build integrations. You've seen from what I described over the last half hour, all the things we've invested in order to make it much easier and faster to build integrations. And now we're kind of focusing more on, when we've got the Cloud Pak, how can we actually make the Cloud Pak much easier to use from an operational perspective? And we've got two key goals here around enhanced observability and automated deployment. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about the different things that we're trying to address here. Let's first start with enhanced observability. And what we're looking at here is that we know that people who are using the Cloud Pak for integration, operators of the Cloud Pak for integration, need an ability to be able to trace integration issues, determine where exactly an issue occurred, and therefore be able to figure out what happened and how I can fix it and so forth. But if we're honest, what is delivered today, we can see that it actually requires you to use multiple different dashboards, multiple different requirements. You need to look at kind of OpenShift logging. You might need to look at individual components for what they're doing. You might look at things like cross-component tracing and so forth. But there's a huge amount of variety of different things that I need to address and need to touch in order to be able to trace where an issue has actually occurred. And we really want to simplify that process for the operator by providing a consistent and holistic monitoring and tracing logging solution that covers all of the Cloud Pak integration estate. And that means that it could be running on Red Hat OpenShift, it could be running on like a public cloud provider, it could be running on premise, you could be running the software components of the Cloud Pak integration in traditional VMs or traditional software. But we want to give you like a single operational view of that entire estate so that you can very easily troubleshoot, and you can also get like a business insight to what's actually running and happening as part of your Cloud Pak integration estate. So that's a big focus for us with the engineering team going forward. The other area we're focused on is around automated deployment. Now, what I'm describing here is, like, you recall that when we talked earlier, we talked about things like use cases which require you to use multiple integration products. Now, a good example of that is the same example I used earlier around, I actually want to create like an API for a mobile application. And if you think about like, oh, what do I need to build for that? You're probably thinking, well, all I really need to build is the API itself. And I might potentially want to do some kind of auditing, so I might push that off to MQ. So that's your view of what you think you need to build on the left. But the reality is there's actually multiple components involved in delivering that. So I would need to use the co-authoring experience that I described in App Connect and API Connect to build that integration flow. And then I would need some form of connector. That might be a connector talking to Salesforce and a connector talking to MQ. So I therefore need an MQ instance and queue upon that instance in order to provide the auditing. And then I would have all of the different API Connect components that I need to manage and deploy. And actually, even that reality is a simplified view. So if we actually look at one of the demos that we ship within Cloud Pak for integration is called driveway deletion, which is a very common pattern of building and exposing an API. And this is actually showing all the different actual physical components that need to run in order to implement the driveway deletion integration. And what we have as a problem today is all of these different components need to be configured separately. So we need multiple assets, we need multiple scripts, which are used to describe and deploy all those components. And none of these things give you a view that actually connects all these things together. So I don't have a view of what that integration actually is. It's actually all of these different things running separately. What we're working to do is replace all of that with a single artifact. So there's a single artifact that describes in detail what my integration is and all the interrelationships between them. And then once I've done that, I should then be able to deploy that whole thing just from a single command. And it should be like operator-based. So I can say, I want to deploy driveway deletion, and I want it to be HA. And I should just be able to do that from a single command. And that would enable me to just deploy that integration I built. Even though it's using multiple integration components, multiple different traditionally integration products, I can just deploy that as a single thing. And what it also gives us is it enables us to actually take advantage of some OpenShift technology, which gives us a view of the relationship between those different things. So like, for example, this would be my driveway deletion application, integration application. And I can see all of the different components which make up that solution. And what we just think is it gives us a better way of building and promoting integrations, moving them through pipelines and so forth, that enables us to deliver all of those and actually think about the thing that I want to manage through pipelines, through different environments and so forth, is my driveway deletion application, rather than having to worry about, well, here's the MQ piece I need to move, here's the App Connect piece I need to move, and so forth. And therefore make it much simpler and quicker to both deploy and then manage those different components. So, getting towards the end of the session here, I just wanted to focus on, like, well, what is the value that we provide for the Cloud Pak integration? If we would compare it with using independent integration products, what do we believe that we provide? And it comes down to these four key areas. So firstly, it's around the integrated experience. So we have single developer user experience that enables us to build APIs, share APIs, and do other integration type scenarios. Another key differentiator is the AI-powered information automation that we provide with Cloud Pak. And then what I talked about the data assist and mapping assist and the auto testing features that we have that will really make it very easy to improve quality, apply AI and automation to the quality of what you deliver and increase the speed with which you can do it. Another key focus and key value of the Cloud Pak integration is around unified operations. So we have already within the Cloud Pak, I didn't even get into this kind of level of detail, but things around like kind of intelligent operators based on IBM standards, template-driven operators that make it very easy to do seamless upgrades, run multiple versions in parallel and so forth, all fully compatible with OpenShift pipelines and so on that make it very easy to deploy and manage things. And an environment that gives you very flexible licensing. So I can move my workload between the different components I have within the CP4. I don't have to do that in advance. And we get the advantage of providing the Kubernetes layer with you for free. You get full OpenShift entitlement to run the Cloud Pak integration components, which you wouldn't get if you use the integration products separately. I'll just point to some demos we have on YouTube that show the features that I have described here. So you can see things like natural language integration as a demo and so on that we have available for you, transformation generator, AI for API testing, mapping assist, and so forth, and also a demo around the cloud native feature for MQ, HA for MQ. And that's really what I wanted to cover. I tried to explain some of the key innovations that we put into the Cloud Pak for integration in this release in order to make it much faster and easier for you to build integrations. And I've also tried to look forward into the future of some of the things that we're hoping to deliver, to continue on that journey and make things easier for you to focus on what we're delivering within the Cloud Pak for integration going forward. So, many thanks for your time. Many thanks for listening. Any questions? If you have any questions, please do ask them in the Q&A, and we will address them over the next few minutes before the end of the session. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come in, so I would like to say thank you everybody for your time. I hope the session was useful. Please do feel free to come back with any questions to myself or anyone of the other IBM team. We'll be happy to help you with them.